We are going to go right in to the next panel. The way forward, what is it? This panel will be moderated by Marvin Krisloff, and it's my incredible pleasure to turn it over to Marvin now. So Marvin, the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jonathan. And I am really feeling very motivated and honored to be part of this wonderful discussion. I'm Marvin Krisloff, President of PACE, and I am still a middle-aged white male wearing a blue blazer with a blue shirt and wearing glasses, and my hair has not grown since this morning. So this panel, and we have 5 spectacular folks, the goal is to help us define the call to action and the way forward. And it's really to reflect on what we've learned today and how we can move forward. So we've got five distinguished folks: Dr. Olusimbo Ige, who is the Assistant Commissioner at New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene. Welcome, Dr. Ige. Marco Damiani, whom we've seen a lot of today, the CEO of AHRC New York City. Irfan Hassan, who's the Deputy Vice President for Grants at the New York Community Trust. Irfan. And Judy Human, who is the International Disability Advocate and founder of Disabled in Action. Judy. Hi, Judy. And lastly, Debbie Thomas, who is the VP for Communications and Insights at Salesforce.org. Welcome, Debbie. So the big question for this panel, and I'm going to ask each of us to reflect on it, what are the things we need to do concretely to go forward here? So I'm going to ask you each for your perspective on the day and your vision for the future. And I'd like to start with Dr. Ige, please. As someone who plays such an important role in New York City's Department of Health, what is the single most important action you believe must be taken going forward?
Hi, everyone. I am a Black woman in my 40s with glasses, Black hair, wearing a Black dress. I am an African immigrant, so I speak with an African accent. And my role right now as the Assistant Commissioner for Health Equity Capacity Building informs my view of what the way forward is. We have established today that this is not a single story. This is not just about disability. It's about racism. It's about classism. It's about, the rights of the LGBTQ plus population. So this intersectionality needs to inform our approach. And I think that one of the key factors that we are using within the Department of Health to drive this agenda, it's building capacity, organizational capacity, and community capacity for health equity action. Ensuring that decision makers are aware of their biases, understand how decisions and policies can influence outcomes. It is not about being racist, it's about, does this policy lead to a differential outcome? It's not just about your intention. It's about what outcomes are produced by some actions that we take. So ensuring there's capacity to recognize the drivers of inequities, and also ensuring that there is capacity at the community level for collective action, mobilizing community organizing, making sure there's representation, including people with disability in our advisory committee, making sure that their voices are elevated. So these are some ways that we can move this agenda forward, and we have started and will continue to advocate for disability rights to be mainstreamed into our health justice work.
So what I'm hearing you say is that it's most important to be inclusive in our approach to health issues. What do you think the people in this group, and there are 362 of us right now on this Zoom, what concrete steps do you think we should be taking to help this be accomplished?
I think we need to continue to advocate. Cultural framing is important. The stories we tell, the images we portray. Like Commissioner Khaleesi said, people with disability don't need to be fixed. They are people that are contributing productively to our community. Our narrative, our stories about people with disability is not from a place of powerlessness, it's from a place of power. We have value and contribution and incredible lived experience that can be shared and contribute to the framing of the health agenda. So making sure we're participating in these spaces. When we're talking racism, we're part of it. When we're talking gender rights, we're part of it. Our collective supportive voice is what changes policy. So I will say that is one area where we can all come together and change the framing around disability.
Thank you.
If I could, Marvin,
Judy.
carry on with what was just being said. I appreciate the comments that the previous speaker made, and I know they're genuine, but I have to say, not around you, but around the issue of capacity building. I think, we really need to look at what that means. I'm 73 years old, and people have been talking about capacity building since I can remember these discussions. So I think if we're really looking at capacity building, we need to look at who are the agents that need to be involved in helping to ensure that capacity, in fact, is strengthened. So I think we need to be speaking with the affected group. And here we're talking about disabled individuals with all types of disabilities from all backgrounds. We're also needing to speak to professionals in the field and others to get a better understanding of what they know and what they don't know. We need to be, and I think Victor was saying this on the previous panel, we need to make sure that these trainings are happening. They need to be integrated, in my view, not as separate courses on disability that are optional because nobody comes, or the people who come are the ones who know. It needs to be, Marvin, as the head of a university, it needs to be a review of your university and others, and what are the courses that people are taking, not just in the field of health, but across the board. How is this discussion of inequity and disability being raised? I mean, younger people who have a better understanding that there is a disability rights movement because of Crip Camp and various other pieces of information that are out there are saying we never learn anything about this. People that are graduating from universities in human rights and learn nothing about disability and human rights. So it needs to be, for me, I talk about an onion and taking the onion apart and who is on which level in the onion. And there needs to be accountability. People need to be measured on progress. And when we talk about capacity building, which I think we all believe in, we all know in our profession when it's really happening and when it's not. We're not measuring it. People aren't being dinged for not doing it right. So much more in-depth discussions about how we implement what we believe needs to happen.
So Judy, you've certainly been a pioneer in this field, and it is, you speak with a lot of authority when you say that we haven't made as much progress. what do you, I mean, if there was one thing that you would want people to do as a result of this conference, what would that one thing be? What would that one thing be?
I'm not very good on one thing. People hate, give me the
Okay.
one thing. I'm not a one thing person, but one of the things is what I was just discussing. We know that people in working in the myriad of jobs that we're discussing, because there are many, are not receiving the training that they need to be able to do a good job. If we're talking about education, obviously we continue to talk about the fact that teachers in the classroom and principals and superintendents, et cetera, frequently are not knowledgeable about what good practices are to ensure that disabled children with various disabilities can in fact be getting a quality education. What is going on at the universities as people are coming into the field? What kind of continuing education is going on? How are we enforcing our laws? So I think in one way, it's really training disabled people and parents as appropriate on what laws exist and what their rights are, putting money into technical assistance to help that happen and to ensure that individuals who need assistance in advocacy can be getting it from well-trained, knowledgeable people who are not being held, who are going to be able to truly advocate and not be afraid of advocating because afraid of losing money for the advocacy work that they're doing. I think that's one. And strengthening the disability rights movement. We talk about everybody should work together. Well, one of my feelings about this, everybody should work together, which I completely agree with, is when someone acquires a disability, typically one of the first people they're going to encounter are doctors. When doctors don't even know about laws that they should help families understand or adults understand what these laws are, they certainly are not going to really be knowledgeable about talking to people about the importance of forming coalitions, looking for organizations that are not just focused on X disability, but are also focused on what are the barriers that you're experiencing? Where are the organizations that you can be joining, that you can put your energy into to help deal with accessibility of whatever types, whatever it may be. The healthcare profession, in my view, from a public health perspective, needs to really have a much better understanding of what those barriers are. They're not the ones who are going to be involved in policy on transportation or whatever, but they are the ones that have to help people who are entering disability or who have had disabilities for many years to really listen to what they're saying, listen to what their aspirations are, encouraging them to have aspirations and being there with them as they're trying to move forward.
Judy, I'm seeing comments in the chat saying that we're asking you to tell the agency that these trainings should be mandatory, not optional. So Judy, I don't know if you have that ability, but you're being urged to take that message. Marco Damiani is the CEO of one of the largest disability rights organizations in this city, in this state. What is the single most important action you think must be taken going forward?
Well, thank you, Marvin, and the comments so far. I want to comment briefly on what's been said so far, and Andy said it also, and I'm going to say it slightly differently. I believe there's been a balkanization of the disability community, and Judy's reinforced that, others have as well. And I think, to bear with me on the concept, a lot of it's based on how resources flow to people, organizations, and governments.
Right.
We behave to some extent the way we get paid. That may sound cynical, but it's true. And I think one of the key things that hopefully this will enable is getting at the right tables. I had a great conversation with Judy yesterday and tremendously proud to be able to talk with her. And we've got to get at multiple tables. And those tables, I think, need to be sure that resources come in ways that bind the disability community, do not balkanize them. There has been a divide and conquer approach, whether it's intentional or not, for many, many decades. I work at an organization that's very large, but totally siloed. And the purpose of this symposium for me is to enable me to learn more and the people that work for AHRC to learn more about the disability community generally. So I think that it's similar to what we were saying earlier, but I think it's key. And I also think related to it, we do not value the workforce, the hundreds of thousands of people around this nation that help people with disabilities have the life that they choose. And we could go on about all of that, but I believe very strongly, and this is very specific now, with the American Jobs Plan, there was $400 billion targeted for care infrastructure. We cannot lose the opportunity to make sure those resources go to valuing the people that give people with disabilities the support they need to have the lives that they want. If that workforce is devalued, there's a transitive property of devaluation for people with disabilities. So I would say that we need to bind together to strongly advocate to the Biden administration and to our local states and governments where those dollars will go, to be sure that they go to places that increase compensation, support, and value for this workforce. That's what I would say is a top priority.
Thank you. Irfan is a program officer for a major grant maker in this city who is aiming to ensure that New York City is a vital place and an inclusive place. What do you think is the single most important action that must be taken?
Well, thank you, Marvin. And I'm going to take kind of the license that Judy set forth a little earlier to not stick with just one thing, because I think there's several things that do need to be done. But before I get to that thing, for the benefit of the audience, I'm a 54-year-old cisgendered South Asian male of Pakistani heritage. I have black hair speckled with gray, brown skin, and I'm clean shaven, use the pronouns he and him. And I'm wearing a blue and white checked shirt, and the background in my Zoom screen is of the Trust logo. And if I move my head, the Statue of Liberty behind me. So with that, let me just start a bit with just a little bit about philanthropic giving, because I think it would be helpful for the audience to understand how disability fits within philanthropy. The Foundation Center, which collects data about what giving is across the country, noted that in between 2008 and 2018, about a total of 22 billion, big figure, or just about, not such a big figure, 3.5% of 623 billion in what foundations gave out was targeted for people with disability. So that I think is an important statistic to hold. And it's terribly mismatched with another statistic the CDC put out recently, that about 61 million adults live in the United States who have a form of a disability. So I just want to start with those two figures as a point of context. Now, while I think we all know that although there may be some grants in a very small percentage that overtly serve people with disabilities, the reality is people with disabilities are everywhere. We are in our homes, we are in our schools, we are in our workplaces, in our communities, in any area. And I think, therefore, one can only hope that actually more dollars are helping people with disabilities, although I'm not sure that it's going to be a hugely increased number. But now getting to your question, Marvin, I think the way forward for philanthropies, I'll wait until we have the interpreter switch. Okay. The way forward for philanthropies, I'd say there are 5 things that foundations should do if they aren't already doing it, which I think can get to some of the challenges that we've been talking about earlier today. inclusion. And by that, I mean, ask if a project that is seeking to do anything, how is it going to include and serve people with disabilities? Because more likely than not, there are people with disabilities who are being impacted, whether that is visible or not. Ask whether people with disabilities have been included in the design of that effort or as part of what the organization does regularly. Third, recognize, and I think this point was made clear in some of the earlier sessions, that none of us have a single identity, and therefore needing to take the intersectionality and how disability fits within it very, very seriously. Fourth, and people have mentioned this all the way through, capture data. You know, unless one captures data, you can't push for further change. And finally, I'd say I recognize that foundations occupy a great place of privilege within the nonprofit sphere. And therefore, for foundations, the one thing I think that we can do is to advocate and support for advocacy. Very, very critically. While our funds can help in supporting good programs and improving, care for, a particular sector, I think using our resources to really leverage the change at the system level is something that a foundation must do and really must be part of the way forward. So I'll end there. I'm happy to take questions.
Irfan, in terms of your last point, does that mean that you think foundations should be supportive of advocacy efforts, programmatic efforts, or other types of efforts, or all of the above?
I would say all of the above. And speaking as an individual, not necessarily, a foundation representative, foundations or nonprofits, and certain foundations are also nonprofits and have the ability to lobby. Now, private foundations can't do that, but public charities, foundations that get money from other sources as well, do have that. And taking that seriously and using some of your money to put behind that type of effort is just really, really critical. So I don't want foundations to go out there and break the law and land yourself in trouble, but study the law carefully and see what you can do and use it, because that is just so critical. So I'd say, Marvin, all of the above, but particularly where some of your money can put pressure on changing the system, use it.
Thank you. Thank you. And now, last but certainly not least, Devi, welcome. You're here representing a corporation with the mission of empowering businesses to connect us all. So from your perspective, what's the most important action that you think must be taken going forward? And I'd be happy to hear, what you think Salesforce has been doing in this regard.
Thank you, Marvin. Thank you, first of all, for inviting me to be a part of this. I don't know if everyone feels like I'm a bit of the strange bedfellow on this panel, so let me help to clarify a little bit of that. First, for the sake of the audience, I am a South Asian woman. I'm wearing a pink shirt. I have black hair up to my shoulders. I am standing in front of a large blue painting. It's one of my favorites, and it indicates the ripples that you can see in water, and it's a watercolor textured painting. I'm very, very excited to be here. I'm the global head of communications and insights for Salesforce.org. Salesforce.org is a part of Salesforce. It's a unit within Salesforce, but we are very much focused on nonprofits and educational communities and how we empower those communities to go out in the world and create the change that they were designed to create. And I know that you all are wondering, why is the tech sector here discussing the path forward? Why is the corporate sector here discussing the path forward? Well, I can tell you a little bit of why I think we're here. One is, I believe technology is part of the path forward. I'm sure that's not surprising to many of you. And I really want to talk about that from the perspective of data, because I 100% believe what Judy said, which is that why are we here always measuring COVID positive rates and COVID death rates, and yet we never talk about measuring bias? We never talk about measuring justice, and we don't talk about measuring reform. Well, guess what? When data, when used correctly in the right technology platforms, can do all of that and hold a lot of people very accountable. So that's incredibly important in terms of the path forward. The second thing about technology that I really think I want to make clear is that it can be the great equalizer when used correctly. Technology can increase accessibility. It can really allow people from many different backgrounds and all different voices to have access to information and resources that they didn't have before. And we can show all sorts of examples of that as it relates to health equity and as it relates to vaccine management and distribution, particularly in light of the conversation here today. And lastly, I want to talk about why I'm here from the perspective of corporate social impact. I agree with everything that Irfan said about foundations and communities, but impact goes beyond resources and investments. It's all about multi-sector partnerships. I think problem solving is sector agnostic. It really does not belong to the policymakers, the government, the nonprofits. It belongs to everyone. And a position that Salesforce has is the ability to convene, the ability to bring different voices together at the table, not to just have a seat at the table, but to have a voice at that table. And that includes people with disabilities. It includes organizations like your own. And it allows us to develop a joint plan, a plan that involves the expertise from everyone, including corporations such as ourselves. So I think there's a lot of value in discussing how can we develop a little bit more multi-sector sharing of challenges so that we can problem solve together. Because remember that problem solving, it doesn't belong to just one sector.
Debbie, thank you for that challenge and opportunity. I'm wondering if people on this panel believe that this conference might be the start of something like a multi-sector partnership, and are there foundational partnerships that are already existing that we can build on?
I would say, first off, I'm glad Salesforce is here, and we're going to hold you to your offer. I think it's an offer to be more engaged, to be at the table with a voice. I know that you've had a history of doing that anyway, but I think today's conversation so far is somewhat unique. I think we've all certainly seen and heard and embraced the conversations around disability and COVID and race and COVID. I think there are not as many conversations about disability, race, and COVID. And I also believe strongly what you're saying about technology, but what you've heard today, what we've all heard today, is we know technology can be an equalizer. We know that it was vital to at least saving lives during the pandemic in many cases, but many people didn't have access to the technology. So I think a major responsibility, I think, of governments and possibly large corporations and foundations is to enable that access to the technology. It's an obvious thing to say, but it's very true. And we, for instance, sort of support a lot of people that live in the community, many thousands, and the ones that didn't have access to technology became invisible. We had to go knock on the door and see if they needed help getting medication or getting food for today. So that's an example. It's a real world example of not having access to the technology that you're talking about, which is so incredibly important and powerful.
You know, I was thinking that the universities, of course, and education in general, as I think Fabian said in the last panel, are critical because at least I think those of us in education believe, and I think most people would say the data support, that education is really the truest path to both personal growth and economic self-sufficiency. And I think this is an area that I would like, and Andy talked about employment, and I think the link between education and employment is so critical. And clearly, as Judy's pointed out, the educational sector has not necessarily served the communities as well as they could. And that's something that I think perhaps Salesforce and the New York Community Trust can help, because I think the government is not necessarily going to be able to do it alone. And I don't know.
Also, sorry.
Yeah,
I also
please.
want to say that I definitely believe that money is important, but money is not always the answer. And so I would like to look at issues like what is going on in higher education. When Black studies, queer studies, American studies, gender studies, whatever they may be, are being taught, the likelihood of anything on disability in those courses is very limited. Very few courses in the area of disability studies, disability majors, cultural centers on college campuses that frequently have nothing to do with disability, where disabled people have difficulty getting these cultural centers established when the universities have committed themselves to other cultural centers. I think, Marvin, I don't mean to be just talking about higher ed right now, but it's an example. And that is that higher ed has been obligated since 1973 to not discriminate against disabled people. That law does not say you're only supposed to be looking at physical accessibility and technology accessibility. It says across the board. And population of disabled students, faculty, and staff is still much smaller than what it likely should be. The racial diversity and other forms of diversity are not necessarily there. The dropout rate for disabled students in higher education is higher and needs to be addressed. So there are a lot of issues that higher ed, if it really focused on the breadth of what it needs to do, could be a leading example that would be none of this should be going on independently, but the same thing in the business community. Obviously, technology is critically important. Some of the issues of concern that I have in technology is that disabled people in elementary school and high school are not being given the training they need in order to be able to know and learn about technology. The curricula are not adapted in a way that frequently students can be as successful as possible. I mean, schools like in New York that are specializing in areas of technology, when you ask whether or not there are students with intellectual disabilities in those schools, the likelihood is no. And then of course, things like AI and technology, and how, yes, technology is very, very important, accessible technology, but for disabled people and others really is becoming a barrier that is going to be precluding people from getting jobs because of the algorithms and things of that nature. So can this discussion continue to move forward? Which is what I think Marco was raising. Obviously, I think it is. I think this is great that this group that you've convened today be a part of that discussion. But I would also look at what other tables like Disability In and National Organization on Disability and other groups, higher ed groups, the American Association of People with Disabilities, these organizations that are working on this, look at who is out there. And, I think Irfan, in the area of philanthropy, the Berkeley Center for Independent Living started because of the San Francisco Foundation, which is a community foundation. Their director took a risk on this group of young, kind of radical disabled people. The Community Trust Fund foundations are so important. And I think the point that you were making about ensuring that your grant making is truly inclusive of disability and not just separate funding. But I think also the foundation world is beginning to do a little bit more work. Darren Walker from the Ford Foundation and Rich Besser from Robert Wood Johnson Foundation and the President's Council on Disability and Foundations are also doing good work. We're at the cusp of doing a lot more, but it really means that we have to be coming together more and holding ourselves responsible as much as others.
Absolutely, Judy. And yes, I didn't mean to imply that foundations have been completely fitting this out, but I think
I didn't take that.
that we can.
No, I didn't get that at all. But they're not
Commissioner
doing enough.
Ige, I know that you're focused on health, but do you think that one of the challenges is that government is also sort of siloed, and is there a sense that what is the way forward in terms of trying to get government as a partner across these different concerns?
I think representation is key. The loudest voices in the room get the most resources. So we need representation in government. We have the Mayor's Office for People with Disability. We work very closely with them. They provide a lot of advisory support and guidance for our work in the Department of Health. But we also have gone ahead to have a community advisory group with people with disabilities represented there that help provide some guidance and recommendations on our work around COVID-19 response and the vaccination program. And that has made a lot of difference. The advocacy that comes from these areas have really driven some of the changes we've seen in, changing our website, making sure that we have information, available for people in different ways that makes it easy for people to access and use. So all of those were recommendations from the advisory group. So having that representation, I think, is important in driving policy and in driving resources. When we bring community partners on board, making sure they're those that serve people with disability as part of the outreach efforts. So these are some ways that we have seen change happen and see things move forward. So that representation, I think, is key.
And I think related to that is a comment that Tawara has made in the chat, and I don't know if everyone has seen it, but the point that, at least to summarize, and Tawara, if you want to speak yourself, perhaps you can unmute and say it, but at least the point I took away was that it's not just training, but it's really, to your point, Commissioner Ige, about representation, and really, and Judy, you said this very powerfully, having people at the table, so that this is not just being done for people, but it is being done with the people that we're trying to serve. Tawara, do you want to add anything?
No, I'm in listening mode.
Okay, all right. Well, you were just getting kudos for your comments, so I wanted to give you voice if you wanted to take it. Marco, where do we go from here? You've got all these great resources. You've got the foundations. You've got Salesforce.org. You've got Judy Human, who will be, the most amazing spokesperson anyone could want, and you've got government at the table. So where do we go from here? And I'm not sure if this is the moment where I turn it over to you, but what I can say is that what I've heard from this panel, in very brief, is that it's not just resources, but it's also advocacy and inclusion at the deepest level, whether it's, and I take your point, Judy, about higher education. No sector is doing enough, and I think, not that I can control higher education, but I think higher education needs to do a lot more. I think education at all levels needs to do a lot more. But I think that we're really, one call to action that I'm hearing from this is that in this time where there's so much focus on inequities and disparities, that we really need to fulfill the promise that Judy, you and others challenged us to as a country many, many years ago, and finally live up to the version of democracy that we all grew up thinking this country believed. At least that's what I'm hearing.
If I could interject.
Please.
Say, instead of asking Marvin what he's going to do, maybe you could also say what you're going to do, because that will lend to what he wants to do and others want to do.
Okay. All right. You're good, Judy. What I'm going to do is I'm going to turn to my colleagues on the call and say, what are we doing?
No. I'm talking about what are you doing in your day job?
In my day job, I know. That's what I'm talking about.
Okay.
That's what I'm talking about. I know that in my teaching, that I am focusing on disability issues, and we saw the film Crib Camp, but it's not enough. That's one teacher in one class. And I'm going to ask the questions, and we're going to try to see what we can do in terms of an action plan. And I think that's what all of us should be doing. But I pledge that I will take that on myself. But now I'm going to pass the baton to Marco, and maybe Marco can help us move forward as well.
I'm going to make a quick comment, and then I'm going to give it back to Marvin to close this panel, and then Tawara's going to make some comments too. But I want to use a very simple example. I hope it's not too small. A lot of comments about training, and that's absolutely terrific. But training is a beginning; it's not an end. And we did what pretty much every organization in the country did over the summer, is that we, in our case, we enhanced our diversity, equity, and inclusion program. And we really are doing everything we can to make sure it's just not talk. And one of the things that we agreed to do, we haven't totally done it yet, but we've agreed that we will have training on implicit bias for the organization. And we're also going to put into every single manager's job description responsibility around ensuring that we work in an organization that embraces the principles of DEI. We're going to operationalize that, and they will be assessed on that in their annual performance review. So I don't know how it's going to go, but we all believe we can't simply train on this stuff. We have to put something in to the sauce to propel an awareness and behavior change. And when we do that, we have expectations that it will spread and become part of the fabric of who we are as an organization. So there are many, there are much bigger examples of that, but I urge anybody here with any responsibility for other people to be more in the space that we're talking about, to don't just train, please. Activate the training, put accountability in there, praise success. Be sure if someone's not doing it, don't bash them over the head. Give them developmental feedback so they can be better at what we want. So that's my one little thing, Marvin. But I'm going to put it back to you to close out the panel, and I think we're going on to our Jonathan after that.
I think this panel exemplifies the power of different people from different perspectives coming together to really confront what needs to be done and to be challenged to do better. And I take the point about strong representation, strong inclusion, and really questioning some of the structures that we've all built around us. And that's what's happening in our country in many ways right now. And it's a powerful force. And I think that we should use these discussions today and this group going forward. And my hope for all of us is that we can continue to work together. I'm just going to, Marco, if I have 2 minutes, I'm going to ask in the last whatever, if anyone on the panel has anything that he, she, they would like to say before we move on. Irfan, I'm going to turn it to you.
Well, I think actions count far louder than words. So just from this past 20 minutes, I would say in about an hour, I'm part of another panel that is looking at the issue of vaccine equity. Actually, Dr. Ige is also going to be part of it. And while it was always at the back of my mind, I think overtly asking the very questions that I just posed need to be asked even in that context. Now, if, who, where are people with disabilities in our quest to vaccinate and make sure that we can move forward in a way that we are healthy? Just a very practical thing.
Thank you. Debbie?
Thank you, first of all, for inviting me, and agree with everything that's been said. I did want to add that, one of the most important things you can do if you are relatively new to the table or you are looking to make a difference by action leadership, not thought leadership. One of the things you can do is to listen, and to listen to the people who have had lived experiences who know the challenges day to day and who can help you solve the problems in the right way. Salesforce has, for many years, had two specific groups that we listen to, both separately and also at their intersection. One is Ability Force, which is a group of, it's an employee resource group, a very large group within Salesforce of people who represent people with disabilities, both visible and invisible. And they are behind helping us build ability inclusion into the software, into the cloud itself, so that we're designing platforms that are representative and can be accessible to all. That's really important. That's part of listening. It's an important stakeholder group, just as we would listen to our communities. Another group is Bold Force, which is a group that has represented people of color, specifically underrepresented minorities and the Black community in technology. We listen to them as well through our Racial Equity and Justice Task Force. We've taken several different actions that are specifically related to work that we're doing with that group, and also related to removing bias within the technology. Again, an opportunity for us to listen, to learn, and to do better. This is a journey that we're all on. And I really, really believe that no matter what stage you're on in that journey, there's an opportunity to learn and do better. So I want to thank everyone for teaching me on this call and for definitely inviting us to be part of it.
Thank you. Commissioner Ige?
I want to say that we have to be humble in our approach for government. It's about, many times our conversation around, the experts in the room, and the place of lived experience is not always recognized. And so in our approach, in really asking, what do people want? What do people need? And today we have learned from, people across the spectrum. Hearing from people with lived experience, I think, has been very powerful for me. And I think that in all that we do, I think that should be a key feature, not assuming that we know, but always approaching this with humility and asking, what do people want?
Thank you. Judy Heumann, the last word.
Okay, so thank you very much for doing this. I really appreciated what Debbie was saying about the two groups that you have. And one of my questions to you is, with the Black Affinity Group, are you looking at Black disabled individuals? Are you ensuring that they are being included in the outreach program to get people in to learn about technology? I think I'm sure it's something you've been thinking about. It's an area that frequently does not get addressed. There are a lot of different affinity groups. They don't cross over each other. And there are a lot of missed opportunities with work that's already going on. So one thing that I really encourage is that we talk about disability as being across everything, but we don't act that way in our daily jobs. And I think it is really critical that we do that, because that will really allow us to understand both what is going on in a constructive way, what is not going on, and what more needs to happen. And I think we've all agreed that we need to be organizing and supporting the growth and the development of disability rights organizations. And I agree very much with what Irfan was saying before. Foundations certainly can be supporting programs that are actually delivering, Ouija's. But I think also really being able to help people learn about what good policy is, how do you implement good policy, training people to be advocates in policy reform is critical.
Thank you, Judy. And now, Marco, I think I'm turning the baton to you.
Actually, Tawara's going to come on, I believe. Tawara.
Okay, all right.
Thanks, everyone.
Given our time constraints, I have just a very few comments. I want to commend everyone who had anything to do with the symposium from its initial ideas until today. There's so many takeaways from the symposium today. I've been listening very intently, and it's hard to just narrow it down to one or two things. I will do my best. Part of the title of this conference is action. So, as an academic, I'm always looking at things like how is action defined? And just in your regular dictionary, action is defined as the process of doing something, typically to achieve an aim, maybe over a period of time, may take place in stages. And so I am encouraging as we go forward is to understand what actions we can take as individuals, as members of communities within our respective organizations, no matter where they are and what they may be. From what was laid out today, there's a lot of action to be taken. However, we have to own it overall. And then just in terms of things that really stood out were several concepts. One is intersectionality and understanding what intersectionality truly means, specifically the harms, the marginalization, the stereotyping, oppression, all of those things that we know are experienced by persons with disabilities across racial and ethnic groups. And then I also want to really attend to the comments made by Lydia Brown, who distinguished disability justice from disability rights, and that they're not the same. And so Lydia spoke to rather collective liberation. And if we're looking at collective liberation for persons with disabilities, that needs to be front and center on our agenda. So with that said, I thank everyone. And again, thank on behalf of the Georgetown University National Center for Cultural Competence the opportunity to participate.
Thank you very much, Tuara, for your comments. At this point, in a couple of minutes, Marco will close out the symposium for the specifics on the way forward and the necessary call to action for all attendees. So please stay on. Please stay on. Let's continue this momentum and turn it into action. But we now have for you a brief piece created by Rick Guidati, founder of Positive Exposure, who has traveled the world documenting and celebrating those who are at risk of stigma and exclusion, but who represent the rich diversity of humanity and the larger landscape for the implications of the intersectionality of disability and race on global health. Through his work, Rick reminds us that it is our differences that we all have in common, so it is through our differences that we should be brought together to solve complex problems such as those focused on here during our discussions today.
White lettering on a black background spells positive exposure. Chloe from New York has brown skin, short, dark, curly hair, and is wearing a black mesh top. Seated in her wheelchair in front of a pale yellow wall, she's smiling directly into the camera with her hands clasped in front of her. Jeffrey from New York has brown skin and short, dark hair. He's sitting in profile in a wooden chair wearing white sneakers, blue jeans, and a blue knit sweatshirt with white and blue stripes. He has glasses and is smiling, looking into the camera. Azazri from India is a little girl in her mother's arms. She's wearing a black and white striped top with black trim. She has brown skin, dark curly hair with big dark eyes. She has a bindi on her forehead. Her mom is wearing a bright yellow blouse with a black knit shawl. Alu from Mali, West Africa, has brown skin like his two friends and short dark hair. He is smiling and looking directly into the camera with his hand on his chin. His friends on either side of him are partially cropped. Sarah from New York has brown skin and short dark hair. She's wearing a pink short sleeve top, standing in front of a ballet bar and a pink wall bathed in sunlight. Her arms are raised above her head and her eyes are closed. She is smiling. Laksha from New York has light brown skin and shoulder-length black wavy hair. She's in a black suit holding a white cane with a black tip. She's smiling into the camera. Her reflection is visible in the glass behind her. Sam from New York is an older gentleman with brown skin and a thin gray mustache. He's wearing a black cap, black glasses, and white striped shirt. He's looking right into the lens with an elegant and distinguished look in his eyes. Carol from New York is sitting in a chair against a gray wall. She has brown skin and short dark hair. She's wearing a blue shirt with zippers on the pockets. Her left arm is on the back of the chair and she is smiling and looking into the lens. Ben from New York is a young Asian man seated in a wheelchair and wearing a gray-lined hoodie covering his short dark hair. He's wearing wireframe glasses and has a serious yet warm expression. Sabrina from New York has brown skin and long reddish braids. She's seated in her wheelchair, hands on her hips, and looking into the camera with a great big smile. She has a green, blue, and gray scarf draped over her shoulders and fluorescent green top. Brandon from Boston has light brown skin and hazel eyes, wearing a black wool cap covering a purple bandana. His dark facial hair, gray shirt, and silver half-hoop earring in his left ear. He has a clear oxygen tube across his cheeks and under his nose. Lala from Mali, West Africa has brown skin and short dark hair. She's leaning on her hands on the back of a chair in front of a light green wall. She has pale blue almond-shaped eyes. Sean from New York has brown skin and short dark hair. He is wearing a black suit, deep burgundy shirt, brightly colored tie, and black glasses. He's sitting inside on a window ledge. The street is visible through the glass. Sean is grinning and looking into the camera. 8 young students from South Africa are sitting on a bench, giggling and clapping their hands. 2 students on each end of the bench have brown skin. 5 of the students are wearing brightly colored hats, and 4 of them have albinism or a pale skin. White lettering on a black background spells positive exposure.
Many thanks to Rick Guidotti for sharing that beautiful tapestry of people with disabilities from across the globe. Also, thanks to Jonathan Novick for his flawless MC skills. John, I think you should consider a talk show. Today's his last day at MOPD, and we wish him the very best in future endeavors. And of course, thanks to our credible partners and to the Planning Committee. New York City is an international city, and as such represents the intersectionality we've discussed today. What we do here can inform what can be done elsewhere. We also can and must learn from others. In that vein, we have learned a lot today from the outstanding panelists, presenters, and moderators about many challenges before us, the human impact of the pandemic on people with disabilities, and possible roadmaps for reform. Being disabled is not a condition. It is part of the human condition. Prejudice, discrimination, and segregation of people with disabilities are an assault on our common humanity. We cannot let that stand. There's nothing good about the pandemic. It's been horrific. But there is something that I will call a pewter lining, and that is the opportunity for us to gather today and commit to doing something. Something that will make a difference. Something that will get us sitting at the right tables with the right people to insist on long overdue changes that ensure the rights of people with disabilities, and certainly those of color. This is not a new imperative. We heard Judy say this over and over again, but it's a necessary one. Failures in housing, education, employment, transportation, technology access, and health equity are among many factors disproportionately affecting people with disabilities. You may have heard the phrase, the system isn't broken, it was built to work that way. Earlier today, our keynote, Daniel Dawes, showed compelling evidence in support of that unfortunate circumstance. Let's keep this top of mind after the symposium. Today's symposium is a call to action. We commit to following up with everyone who registered for today's event, 1,100 of you. We will provide a platform for continued engagement, discussion, problem solving, and opportunities for action. And we'll also send out a survey to glean the impact of the symposium. You had the ability to be a voice for positive change. Let's make this moment a movement. Thanks for joining us today, and please stay well.